Welcome to the 18th Annual Entertainment and Media Global Outlook. I'm Deborah Bothan, and I have the pleasure of being the Global Entertainment and Media Leader for PricewaterhouseCoopers. As you know, we are live today, and I want a special welcome to those of you here in the studio at 300 Madison in New York City, as well as the over 75 client leaders that are watching us live from Germany, and the others that are watching us all over the world. We've done some things a little bit different this year with respect to how we gather information and how we get ready to collect all the data for the Outlook. In addition to having several workshops where we had some of you in the room and others vet the ideas and the research that we had, we also did a preview of the Entertainment and Media Outlook data and themes in China. I was there several weeks ago, and I have to tell you, that is one of the most perfect places to preview and to discuss some of the themes that we're going to talk today, because the experiences there are extremely immersive. There's a lot of companies like Baidu, Tencent, who are really leveraging technology to create a unique user experience. For instance, last year when I traveled around the world, and I commented on it a year ago at the Outlook, I said, the changes are accelerating faster and faster and faster. Well, this year what I felt, and not to be too trite, but I really felt like this incredible speed is our new normal. That's just our life. We are actually acting a little bit like our kids for some of you in the room. We're acting a little bit younger, we're a little bit more mobile, we're a little bit more digital. Why? Because we don't really have any choice but to act that way in our personal and our professional lives. And so therefore, we're influencing a lot of the ways that our business is run. And in fact, many businesses in this room have also moved quite a ways down that path in the last year towards being a much more technology-enabled, user, consumer-centric organization. This year, more than ever, we have really gotten on the ground around the world. I just mentioned the trip to China and several other countries, but we've also spoken to our country leaders in 54 countries, which you'll hear about in a few minutes from Stephanie, about the data. Does it make sense? Do the themes resonate? What's different about this country on the ground than the average? Because you hear a lot about averages when you talk about global big numbers. And just remember, whenever you hear those, there are lots of differences when you get on the ground in every country, when you get on the ground and are talking about specific segments. So I always want to put that out there relative to any numbers that you hear, because it is not your number in your segment. It is not your number in your country when we talk about global averages. All of the work that we have done, as many of you know, I recognize many faces in the room, culminates in a 5-year forecast. Now, you probably got, when you were upstairs, 3 or 4 different documents. One of them is a magazine that we work with Strategy and Business on. In fact, I was at the airport at JFK the other day, was able to pick my copy right up in the airport, which, you know, for me, I'm like a real media person, so that was pretty cool. And we have some of our thought leadership articles in there, which you'll see on artificial intelligence. We've got an interview with Shelley Palmer, which was a lot of fun, as well as Chris Vollmer's article on fan centricity. You'll get to see him a little bit later this morning. The other document that you got was the actual Outlook pamphlet that has some of the high-level data, a couple of steps down from what you're going to hear about today, as well as 6 other articles that drill deeply into things like deals and strategy, security, etc. So the other thing I want to say before I turn it over to my partner Stephanie is that I want you to be involved in this experience today. So it is perfectly acceptable to be on your phone as long as the sound is off, if you're going to tweet about what you're hearing today, and you'll see live some of those directly in front of you. So with that Curtain up, Stephanie Kane.
All right, thank you, Deborah. I'm not afraid of you guys. I was told it looks better to stand back here for the camera. I was getting used to all this live stuff, but thank you, Deborah. Good morning to everyone. I'm thrilled to be here. My job this morning, I've done this a couple times, I recognize a lot of faces, is to put out there for you just a brief overview of the Outlook data, highlight the trends that that data was telling us, and talk to you a little bit about the conclusions that it's led us to draw. And this year, when we were looking at the data, and we stepped back, there were two questions that just kept coming up every time we were looking at it. So you're going to hear a lot of the conversations today touch around that. Let me throw them out at a real high level just to start. So the first question was whether entertainment and media, in terms of revenue growth, is slowing, on a decline, or stagnant, somewhere in the middle. And that's a strange place for us. We haven't really asked that question in a long time. It's not a new question, but the answer seemed to be a little different. And the answer was yes and no. And you're going to see that, and you'll draw your own conclusions as I go through the data today. The second question that kept popping up was an age-old question that we've been asking ourselves in this industry for a long time. Content or distribution? Which one is king? Well, the answer, as we started working through that data, it seemed to be, even if you have great content, even if you have a great distribution channel, or even if you have both, it's not enough anymore. You really need to be leveraging technology and creating a direct, great user experience, a fantastic user experience, if you want to continue to experience the growth that we've been seeing over the past couple of years. So the overarching themes revolve around those topics. And again, you're going to hear it through the discussions today. But the data really highlighted the maturity that we're seeing relative to our industry, even to some extent on the digital side. It spotlights pockets of opportunities, and we're going to talk about that today. It makes clear the impact of technological change, and it also, as I said, makes abundantly clear the absolute necessity to drive a fantastic user experience. Those themes will be, as I said, the discussion topics that both I'll touch on relative to the data, but you're going to hear a lot about what all different companies are doing to address just those instances as we go through the panelists today. For those of you who may be new to the Outlook data, let's just take a step back. Let's talk about what's actually in the Outlook just for a moment, and that'll come up on the slide now. We touch on consumer spending. We analyze consumer spending. We analyze advertising spending. Right? Both of those are revenue forecasts that we look both on a 5-year historical basis and a 5-year projected basis. And included in those numbers are internet access as well. We do this analysis across 17 different segments, and that's expanded from prior years. We've added 2 new segments this year. We added VR and we added esports. And then lastly, the data is substantially consistent, as Deborah said, across 54 countries. With just a few exceptions, we really do try to drill down wherever we have enough aggregated data to touch on the segments in each individual country. The other thing that we did new today and in this year was going back to that principal premise that just kept coming out, is that it's all about the user experience. Well, so we decided to aggregate the data at a different level this year. You have all the details, but we took a look, and you'll be able to sort it this way across access, watch, read, play, and listen. Right? It's not perfect as you read through the segments. It's not perfect how they all actually align there, but it really drew some interesting spotlights around where the opportunities are, where the risks are, where the growth is, and to some extent, what's slowing down. And we'll touch on that too a little bit today as well. So here's the global headline that you've been waiting for, coming up on the next slide. There we go, we've got it now. 4.2% cumulative average growth across the industry globally over the next 5 years. That number compares to a GDP of 5.6% over the same time period. And that combination gives you some metrics that are really a stark reality relative to our industry, and you can see that depicted on the slide. So the global entertainment and media revenue, as we measure it, will represent a declining share of global GDP. Our share is declining in terms of spend around the globe. Again, Deborah said these are broad averages. We'll get down a little bit deeper. But the trend line, while it varies by sector and it varies by geography, there's definitely some bright spots in there too, as well. And before we go into these details though, what I thought I'd do is just take a step up, because there's definitely some macro factors that were driving our outlook this year that I think are important to share. So first, just a moment ago, I was very purposeful when I said it's the entertainment and media revenue globally as we measure it. And that's because the universe of what's considered entertainment and media spend is consistently and continually growing. Right? It's expanding into many different areas, several of which have significant potential, but they're not captured directly in the 17 segments that we just put up. Just to give you one example, we know that companies are channeling a portion, and an increasing portion, of their advertising revenue towards e-commerce sites. But those totals across those e-commerce sites are not yet aggregated. Hopefully they will be one day and we can pull that together. Second, as digital markets mature and as the user experience improves, our spending, consumer spending, advertising spending, it's getting more efficient. And with that, it might not grow as rapidly as it has in the last couple of years. Third, it is obvious that industry outlooks, any industry, not just our own, are being impacted by the uncertainty around economic and political changes that are going on all around the world around us. Everyone's really familiar with that. And add to that uncertainty, the uncertainty around the speed of uptake and technological changes. That has a very direct impact to us. So with that, whether it's AI, whether it's VR, whether it's IP protocols, you throw it out there, there's uncertainty around how quickly we can convert those business models and monetize them. And then finally, within our industry for certain, regulatory challenges are evident in every single territory that we look at. We're seeing issues around data privacy, we're seeing issues around security, and the more regulation that comes around those issues, the more difficult it is to actually track that data. And that's the data that we absolutely need to drive that user experience and in turn drive growth. So each one of those 5 factors are pressure points. They're pressure points on growth globally as we look out over the 5 years, and they're reflected in our outlook numbers. But what can you do, therefore, with that as a backdrop, to thrive in this marketplace? To thrive in a marketplace that's increasingly competitive, that may be slower growing, and where content and distribution are important, but they're not enough. Ultimately, our premise is that tomorrow's leading companies will look out today and recognize that growth is going to depend, once again, on getting much closer to the consumer, creating a much greater, intimate, interactive user experience. And across the industry, they're going to create compelling and engaging and intuitive user experiences, those that are easy to get to, easy to work with. So we're seeing that as we're talking to clients around the world in terms of being the primary objectives of investment to drive growth. And technology and data lies right in the center of that. That's the way we're going to get there. Companies who are leveraging technology to get to know the consumers, to build a relationship with them, to involve them in their product, whatever that might be, are the ones who are going to hold the significant advantage. Ultimately, within this slower growth environment, making the right choices between what consumers want, balancing that against what technology can enable today and again tomorrow, is what's going to drive the business models. And with those business models, we'll need data-enabled systems in order to energize, to amplify, and to monetize those consumer experiences. That's what the data is telling us. I've talked at a high level. Let's get to the numbers, because we know you guys like the numbers. So we're going to go there for a couple minutes now. So as I talked about that hypothesis and getting down, what you can see across this slide is that the majority of our traditional industry segments are growing, right? They show growth over the next 5-year term. But that growth on an absolute basis is slower than we've seen it in the past. There's actually only 2 segments, magazines and newspaper, who are going to decline in terms of absolute revenue dollars over the 5-year forecast. And there are some super bright spots there, of course. There's internet video, which is growing at rapid rates. There's internet advertising. There's our newer segments, but of course the dollars there are quite small. But perhaps the most interesting trend that we see here goes back to that GDP line. And once again, you can see that the majority of our segments are going to struggle to grow faster than GDP, and thus are going to lose share. And when you combine this all together, that's where we get to the global average. And we don't have sufficient growth in our larger segments to offset, we don't have a sufficient growth in our newer segments, to offset the growth in our larger segments. And it turns out that we're looking probably at an industry plateau over the next several years. That's what our forecast is telling us. But again, the details are there. There's some super bright spots. Let's get into some of the details and dive a little bit deeper. Let's talk about advertising. Let's talk about consumer spend and what we're seeing there. Let's start with advertising. So as we mentioned already, there's some pressures around the ad-supported business model. In that regard, there's two stark realities. The first is that many consumers, especially those who are the most desirable, be it the millennials, be it the high net worth spenders, they just don't like watching ads. I mean, quite frankly, which one of us do, right? Who of us would prefer to do it? But we're seeing that come out in rising use of technology to skip ads or to block ads. But maybe more importantly, what the data is telling us is we're also seeing rapid growth in ad light and ad-free subscriptions. So that came out in the data as we look through it this year. Second, around advertising. Overall, global advertising growth is now overwhelmingly driven by internet advertising. In the US, internet advertising in absolute dollars surpassed television advertising in 2016, and that's what you see up here on the screen. And as you can see, we expect that differential to widen as we go out over the forecast period, driven most significantly by mobile advertising. In fact, by the time we reach 2021, our forecast projects that mobile advertising will represent 74.5% of all of the internet advertising out there. And even with the rapidly growing internet advertising market, we're also seeing disparities relative to sharing the wealth. We're seeing huge concentration of where the dollars are going. According to eMarketer's forecasts, Google and Facebook will account for almost 50% of the advertisers' total global digital advertising spend next year. This year, we're in it, 2017, right now. When we hit the end of the year, 50%. And add to that China's Tencent, Alibaba, and Baidu, and they add another 15%. Guys, that's 65% of our global internet advertising concentrated within 5 companies. 5 companies. That's having a huge impact on the publishers. Our traditional publishers are having to rethink their business models. They're having to rethink how they're partnering with third parties so they can continue to get their share. So let's pause here for a minute and talk about why we think we're seeing that phenomenon. I mean, that is a remarkable trend. Why is there this concentration? What do those companies have in common? Well, each one of them has high growth with varying levels in 3 areas: commerce, communication, and content, the 3 C's. We believe that the next super competitor will be a diversified conglomerate with disparate assets, but each one of those assets individually partaking in high digital growth areas. In order for it to work, though, they obviously need to have those assets working together. They need to leverage those synergies greatly. They also need to create a mobile ecosystem around it, and they need to control the user experience, all the way directly to the user. Deborah mentioned it earlier, Tencent. Tencent is a great example of a company who is taking advantage of their unified interface across these 3 C's. They're driving traffic across their mobile desktop, through their chat services, and through their game services. They've created a seamless social and retail shopping experience. So when users are on their social sites or their gaming sites, they're being directed to retailers, which Tencent owns, or at least owns a share of. And once they get to those sites, whether they're service sites or retail sites, they're being encouraged to use TenPay, Tencent's mobile payment application. So again, the full circle, and we're seeing obviously phenomenal growth from that company. In the US, companies like Amazon and then Facebook and Google, which I just mentioned a moment ago, are moving in a similar direction. Again, to varying degrees, but they're moving in that direction. And I think it's a perfect opportunity, it's a perfect entree. Then let's talk about the consumers, because that's who these guys reach. Let's talk a few minutes around our consumer spend trends. On the consumer side of the house, globally and in the US, demand is being pushed by internet access revenue. It's grown above all other categories. In the US, as a matter of fact, access has now exceeded watch, so our video products. In that regard, there's a growing importance that it highlights around connectivity in order to enable consumption. So we talked about it, connectivity to get to e-commerce sites, to get to communication sites, to get to health or financial service sites. And this trend just continues. And you can see watch is going to experience slow growth by the size of the CAGR over the period here in the US. And that's because internet video is being offset by slow growth in cinema, as well as negative growth in larger TV segment and video segments. There's another pivotal point that I want to talk about, and that's play. So play are the games and games-related activities. They exceeded listen for the first time in 2016. It's increasing internet speeds that are enabling this. It's VR, and it's getting closer to the user. And it's also esports that's in there, which is a great example of how live events are actually getting you closer to the consumer. So with that, it brings us to another central tenet that we've been talking about, and that's that entertainment and media offerings simply cannot thrive without the power of the fans. So again, it's not just the users, it's not just interacting with them, it's actually getting beyond casual eyeballs down to the fans. And in that regard, Chris is going to come up here later, Chris Vollmer, and he's going to do a whole panel just around that, how you become a fantastic company. So lastly, let me get down to just summing this up a little bit. In our world of slower growth, of intense competition for attention, of continual disruption that's challenging our industry, what do? Well, again, there are definitely some high points. There's lots of opportunities, and we need to focus on them. And the data, the analysis, the perspectives that we bring via the perspective and via the outlook this year, it offers you insights on where companies are adapting, where we're seeing companies invest, where we're seeing them experiment, where we're seeing them innovate across the industry. And in part, they fall into these 6 buckets. And you're going to see these 6 buckets aligned to the articles in your material this year around the outlook. Because we think in order to have strategic growth over the time period, a company needs to hit across these metrics, again, to the extent applicable to them. So that would be strategies around content, partaking in deals, dealing with regulation, thinking about scenarios to deal with that, figuring out your position in the value chain, being innovative, and inclusive in that innovation, driving and adapting to new business models. So with those key factors in mind, with a little brief overview of the data, what I want to do is get us right to our panelists who are going to really dive into this with some practical examples. So I want to turn it back over to Deborah with her esteemed panelists to join her, David and Eden, to take us on for the rest of the morning. Thank you.
How's my makeup?
It's kind of melting a
Everybody
little
good?
bit. Good morning again, everyone. So what I took away from what we just heard, 3 pretty big messages. One about some potential maturity in some aspects of the market. One about technological change and how much that's impacting us. And how important user experience is. Those are my kind of 3 big takeaways. In just a moment, we'll get yours. So what I found really interesting about these 2, well, many things, but the reason that I put this combination of people together is because, on the one hand, there are many, many differences between the 2 of them. They come from different backgrounds, they have different types of careers, they might even be considered to be from different generations. But
Older than I look. Just kidding.
Like you insulted me, and we didn't even start talking
He's
yet.
younger than you.
It's like,
did you sign off on that insult? But what's really interesting to me is that, and we'll talk a little bit more about their backgrounds and what they do, is that after talking to them about these topics on and off in some cases for a lot longer than this last year, they have a lot of fundamental beliefs that are very similar, which I found fascinating. And that is that these ideas that we're talking about, how important it is to really create this dynamic, immersive user experience, both believe in that. In fact, in different ways in their organizations, that's what you do. If you really take it all the way up, that's what you do, both of you, is you really are helping your clients and other stakeholders increase the immersive and the quality of the user experience. So David, let me start with you. Global CEO of Y&R. You're the, let me see, what's the title now? Vice Chairman of the Ad Council.
Actually, new chairman.
Oh, new chair, okay, see, I'm already behind. You were rated in one of the top 10 generous marketing geniuses in the last couple of years. And I got a
Fake news.
I have a very, very long list of all of the social media that you're on, but one I found particularly interesting is you have over 600,000 followers on the Weekly Ramble.
That's on the LinkedIn portion, yeah.
Oh, okay, so you see I'm always a little bit behind. Tell me a little bit about why you think that, or first, what did you take away from what Stephanie said? And why do you think that you have a lot to offer us on this topic?
I think that, if you think about what Stephanie said, if you look at the numbers and you just look at some of the issues around internet advertising, television advertising, etc., I think that we look at it all the wrong way. And there's just a lot of digibabble in it. And to me, digibabble is my term.
Wait. How long were we up here before you said that?
About 10 seconds. So digibabble, you got to get that in quick, because digibabble, in fact, is the one thing that I believe holds back a lot of what we do in our world, and is holding back a lot of ideas, a lot of thinking, and a lot of development. So the problem is when you start talking about advertising, you start talking about television in particular, it doesn't mean anything anymore. Because TV is no longer just ABC, CBS, NBC, CNN, whatever. It's anything that you watch on any kind of a screen. Now, what's most interesting is if anybody thinks that the future of TV is in mobility, not mobile, and mobile could be many things, mobility is being those little screens we carry around, they're just out to lunch. Because people, one of the first things that we know that young people do when they get a job is they go and they buy a big screen so that they can watch. Facebook has now created a special app so that you can actually project from your whatever you're watching, if you're doing mobility, onto a big screen, because that's what people want to watch. So ultimately, all these things have converged.
Right, so
and
it's a
we
little
have
bit
to
like
get back to
that
the
same
convergence.
problem with the television definition we're now having with mobile.
Right, so we just need to get to better definitions of what we're talking about, because at the end of the day, it's about content. It's about the content, who's going to pay for the content, how we access this is going to change in 10 years anyway, so who cares? The real question right now is who pays for it. We've been used to paying for advertising. We're not paying as much by advertising anymore, but the content is way better. The best, we're living in the golden age of content, and we've talked about that. I mean, the best stuff we've ever seen, and somebody's got to pay for it.
So that's where we're living now. You might be wondering, those of you in the audience, why I have this vintage picture up here.
That's
so
because she comes from a different generation than the two of us.
Okay, so we waited that long to insult me. All right. So why, you actually pointed this picture out to me when we were talking about user experience months ago. And why is that?
Because it is a, quote unquote, immersive, lean in, completely together consumer experience. And the truth of the matter is that we somehow think that we've created this notion in the digital world, but this has always been what entertainment is about. Now, I think we've lost it, because personally, from my perspective, there is no digital experience that's as good as this. Having just I saw Hamilton the other night, unbelievable immersive experience. Everybody was singing along with now that it's been out there so long, everybody knows the songs, people actually sing. It's like going to the Rocky Horror Show. This is an immersive experience, and if people don't get it, if you don't get that this is an immersive experience, it's a lean-in immersive experience, then you've completely missed it.
It's alive, is strong and well.
Alive is strong and well, but it's not just that it's alive, it's that there's an ethos here that we have yet to capture, and we might never be able to capture, which is fine, because let's create experiences that are digital, let's create experiences that are live, and understand that they don't have to be the same.
Right.
And maybe we're just going down the wrong path thinking that they're going to be the same.
Eden, So one of the things that excites me about what you do is I haven't met a lot of people that have such an interesting combination of deep analytical, data-based engineering thinking, and you get content too. That combination really is what I understand your current business is all about. Although one of his previous business was, it scares me how smart he is building algorithms used in a hedge fund company. So how do you get from there to the company that you're in right now? And the reason I put this picture up here, it's actually the cover of one of the articles, AI is already entertaining you, which is in your materials. But that combination of creativity, cool content, and technology, that's what you do.
Yeah, I think on the hedge fund side, so I come from kind of like the big data side on the algorithmic hedge fund side. Ran a hedge fund for a few years and moved over to technology. But for me, the cross between a hedge fund and a technology company are actually very human in a lot of ways. So if you look at like a hedge fund, the best hedge funds are people that can look at a human principle, or like, this is something that I believe is a human principle, and trades based off of what they view as a trend that is forming. So it could be our biggest trade when we were a hedge fund was trying to figure out looking at leverage and how leverage decays over time. So the best example I used was like cocaine. When you use something like cocaine, your highs are high.
We're not going to talk about the pilots or anything, are we? Or?
For those of you, no. But like it's very much like drugs, right? So that your highs are high, but then they decay over time. It's much like debt.
And you know this because your wife's a doctor.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, she's a nurse and she works a lot with the homeless population, so a lot on the addiction side. But it's the same thing as debt, and leverage decaying over time is a mathematical principle. So if you take the fact that leverage decays over time, you can figure out that there's a trade around leverage decaying over time. So technology is very similar. If you look at technology as a product in and of itself, then you're looking at it the wrong way. Technology is a enablement product. It allows people to engage with something in a different way. Speaking to sort of the previous segment here, I think user experience, just taking that one step further, I think user experience is key, but it is key because the consumer is king. So consumers have the better ability to discover content that they ever have before through all the platforms and choices that they have. So historically, discovery looked like you walk into a retail store and brands mattered a lot, and the placement of the product mattered a lot. And obviously it still does, but nowadays consumers are judging content based off of the Rotten Tomatoes score. Consumers are judging content based off of the reviews on Amazon. So the discovery process looks a lot different, and the product is more important than, in my view, the advertising around that product. So that's why, again, user experience is key, because if a product doesn't have a good user experience, it's not a great product. So again, the reason why user experience is now king as opposed to 5 years ago, maybe it was less so. I mean, obviously it was still important, is because consumers have the better ability to discover something. There's a lot of examples we can get into around a lot of that.
And we will.
But I'll stop there.
Probably most people in the room are familiar with Y&R, but they might not be familiar with your organization. So just give us a minute on that.
So, I run a company called Fishman Labs. We are tech consultants. We work as an innovation lab for a lot of major brands, and we come in and do a lot of research around what are the new technologies coming up, and then we also help them implement and execute on that. So we're a team of basically like nerds, hackers, designers, developers, and brands give us the liberty to sort of come up with great products for them, and usually in spaces like VR, AR, AI, and mobile and web, obviously. But even when we think about mobile and web, it's about how are these platforms changing and evolving, and how can we do something different? Because most big brands have websites already, so they don't need us to make a new website, or we're not a firm that's going to come in and just design something that's new, but we'll come in and create a new product for them.
Terrific. So with that, that's a perfect segue. When we did our CEO survey this year, which I know David's been involved with over the last several years, and you will be involved with, we found that 23% of the executives we surveyed said that technology would have a huge impact on their future. But for entertainment and media companies, that number was 56%. So what do the two of you think the biggest impact of technology will be on the entertainment and media industry over the next few years?
So I'll just jump in. At the end of the day, technology has always had an impact on entertainment and media, and maybe it's been a leading indicator. So if you go back in time, the original movies were those celluloid things that went around, somebody spun and there was a candle behind it and people would actually come and pay to see these flickering images. And then of course you had Edison, we went to talkies, there's always been a leading edge here of technology in terms of media. We saw Avatar, right? And we thought every movie in the world was going to be done like Avatar. It was going to be that kind of 3D with all CGI. Turns out that's not the case. Turns out actually we went back to more acting, more emotion, more scripts, whatever. So there's always a balance here between the art and the science. I think the reason we see that is because it's always been the case. I think they're reacting to what they know about their industry. Our industry, my industry, because I consider myself to be in that. Advertising is part of the entertainment and media pack. It's always been affected by technology. And so the truth is, I don't even think about it because there's always another technology. There's always, and to Eden's point, it's about enabling technology. It's not like we're creating the technology. It's not like we're out there creating specific stuff. We are using technology. We are enabled by that technology. We are able to take it and adapt that technology. So, but it's always been the case. And I think that when you think about it, it's critical to our industry. So of course they would say it's higher than the average.
Great. So one of the things that we've talked about before that I didn't get right away was this concept that you shared with me about technology and really human behavior, and how there's a connection there that needs to happen around, and you use Maslow's theory to explain it to me.
Yeah, so like Maslow's hierarchy being sort of like your hunger, and then your security, and then your feeling of community, and then feeling of self, and then like God or self-actualization or whatever you want to call it. I think ultimately technology companies, you can't just position them as technology companies anymore. So if you look at the largest 5 publicly traded companies in the world, it goes back and forth, but pretty much they're all what people would consider technology companies. But I think they're a lot more than just technology companies. Like every single large technology company is becoming a media company, becoming a lot of other things outside of just technology. So I think
some of my partners in the room, by the way, would say every company is a tech company.
Right, yeah, so you could argue every company is a tech company, and then you could argue every company is not a tech company at the same time. So I think that it's very definitional to some extent, but ultimately I think tech companies need to address a human need. So to David's point, I think people are still looking to be entertained. So if someone's spending time on their mobile phone, they're being entertained by their mobile phone. If they're spending time on social media, they're being entertained by user-generated content versus produced content. But ultimately, they're all entertaining you in some form or another. So I think understanding that technology is for the purpose of some type of human need at the end of the day makes it a lot easier to say to a media company, you're not in a different position than you were 5-10 years ago. You're actually in the same position and you're just.
If not better.
Well, yeah, and I think technology also changes the place that people discover things, and then how people spend their time too as well. So people are. I think people are spending more time consuming entertainment than they ever have, which is actually a very good thing for media companies who produce content. So more content and better content is being produced than ever because people are consuming that content more than ever.
See, just think about what happened in our world, though. If you go back, so we had radio, right? And all of a sudden, you're sitting in your living room and this voice is coming out of a box, but we didn't say, wow, my God, that's technology, what am I going to do with it? People jumped into it, they figured out how to use it. In the beginning, all radio broadcasts were people just reading from newspapers.
That's right.
And then they learned how to create drama, they learned how to do music, they learned all these things. Then we come to TV. And then nobody sat there and said, oh my God, like how the hell did that guy get into that little box? That's magic or technology. We just said, wow, isn't that awesome? How do you use it? So the original use of television were guys standing in front of radio microphones reading scripts. And then they learned how to do all the things that they learned how to do in radio. The problem with the digital world is we looked at it and said, oh my God, that's technology. So it's amazing that all the other ones we never looked at and said that's technology, just wow, we're going to use it. We said that's technology. So our industry abdicated. I think this whole industry abdicated in the beginning. And so all of a sudden, everything became technology. Retail became technology. I mean, Walmart was a technology company 50 years ago. Right. They had the best supply chain. I mean, you guys know this better than we do. They had the best supply chain. They had the best computer programs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But Amazon became known as the technology company. They're an awesome retailer, an amazing retailer. Prime has got nothing to do with digital. It's a retail strategy. So we abdicated. Now we've gotten back to this point. We've given up that abdication and we said, wait a second, we get it. It's not just technology, it's about people. It's about people first.
Right.
Now how do I take that and make it work?
So there's been a lot of deals in the last several years and a lot of partnerships around this concept, around technology companies becoming much more storytellers, or communications companies buying media companies. Eden, do technology companies need to be storytellers to survive and thrive in the future?
Yeah, I think I was listening to a podcast that Bob Iger did for this new Variety podcast, and he was mentioning, he was asked, why has your sort of M&A track record been so successful? And he sort of talked about focusing Disney as a storytelling company as opposed to a technology company. Obviously, like, there were rumors that Disney was looking at Twitter as a $10 billion acquisition, and then they had Marvel and Lucas that were way more cost effective than buying like a Twitter, and arguably much more impactful. So I think a media company, for example, understanding that its place is as an amazing storyteller, I think is hugely impactful and created such a great culture at Disney. But if you look at what Netflix is doing as a storyteller, they got it really wrong when they first started launching their first pieces of original content, and now you have amazing pieces like Stranger Things. So I think they're starting to understand how to create great content a lot better than they did when they first tried, and I think most technology companies are going to go that direction. I think they're going to purchase a lot of live content. I think you'll see lots of deals take place around professional sports with some of the big technology companies, pending the next 6 months to a year. But they're going to start doing their own stuff too. I mean, YouTube Red had started doing some of its own original content already, and they've got it wrong already, on multiple tries. So it's not as easy to tell a great story as the technology companies, or what we're calling technology companies, think it is. I think it takes time. There's a culture there. I remember before Pixar got bought, Steve Jobs was very concerned about the culture of Pixar when they got bought by Disney. So having a storytelling culture is a very unique thing, and companies that think that they can just snap their fingers and become this amazing storytelling culture, it's not going to happen. It takes time, but if a technology company's role is to really serve a human need, then they have to ultimately tell great stories, and they have a huge advantage too, because their costs to acquire a customer are much less because they own the time of where a customer is. But has Facebook released a great series yet? Has YouTube released a great series yet? Have there been any examples of UGC companies launching great original content? Not really. You could argue Snapchat is probably maybe the best one in their short form content, but we haven't seen it yet. So it's obviously a lot harder than they think it is, and probably we think it is too as well. But they'll probably get it over time, I think. So there's a window of time and opportunity that I think entertainment companies have to really seize the moment. We're great storytellers. How do we maximize that to our advantage?
So that's great news for most of the companies in this room. How do you translate that, or tell us what you think relative to advertising?
Well, advertising is storytelling, and every great brand is about storytelling, and human beings are about storytelling, right? So go back as far as you want to go in history, and the whole history of the world is about storytelling, right? So that's the creation stories, the religion, everything came out of stories. So stories, brands, I don't care how far back you go, this is not new. I think what's interesting is let's talk about where we are today. So if you look at UGC, user-generated content, if you read the analysts from, particularly the Digibabble analysts from 5 to 10 years ago, all talking about how everything was going to die except for user-generated content. So
Right.
all we were going to see were the cats peeing on your shoes that everybody shared because we thought that was funny. Well, the truth is it's not monetizable. And it's no different than the Wall Street jokes that many of us remember back in the 80s that would start in the morning someplace all the way down on Wall Street and then find its way around the world without digital, without anything, without email, etc., because it was an interesting story and it would go around the world. So what's happened is we're in this incredible space where the notion of storytelling has been elevated because we're spending more money and more time thinking about it. So let's go back and just even look at the tech companies. So Amazon makes an announcement 3 years ago that they're going to get into original content. Now maybe they should, maybe they shouldn't, but they did. It's great. And they said, we are going to get into original content because we have the best algorithm. We know
Right.
more about the consumer than we know more than Netflix because they have a very narrow view. We have the biggest view. We know everything. So we're going to make the best content. Why? Because it's going to be cheaper, because we're going to have less starts and stops, so we're not going to have to pilot everything. We're going to be able to come out with hits right away. Nobody remembers what they did the first 2 years. Nobody.
Do you?
It was garbage. No, it was garbage. So what happens? Amazon comes out, they make a big announcement saying, well, we've just hired Woody Allen, the best directors, the best writers, the best producers, the best actors. And somebody asked them the question, what happened to the algorithm? And this is a quote, you can all look it up, you can Google it or Bing it. I have to get that in at least once Microsoft is a client. You have to, but search it. And the head of production at Amazon actually said, well, what did you think? That you put the information in a computer and here's the quote, doot, 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 out comes a show? This is not about computers, it's about art. Now, I thought that was brilliant. And so that's where we are. We're in this place where Netflix does great content because they're spending the time hiring great writers, great directors, great producers, and doing amazing things. Even networks like Starz, which was doing death porn on terrible blue screen a number of years ago, has actually gone and they started doing stuff on location, high production values, because there is no choice today. So I think that when you look at it, you realize that we're in this thing. Now, just one last point, which I think is really important because you come back to Netflix. So Netflix, though, is they're caught in their own bubble. So Netflix produces or buys into, it's not important, a movie called Beasts of No Nation. And what do they do with it? They want to try to win an Academy Award, so they look to release it theatrically. But meanwhile, they've released it on the platform. So once you release on the platform, it's basically free. So they made, the numbers are fairly accurate, $50,000, $48,000 in theatrical release, which was enough to get them into the running, but that's nothing, right? What does Amazon do? Amazon goes to Sundance, they buy Manchester by the Sea, so now they become the executive producers. Yeah. But Amazon could have done the same thing. They could have said, hey, we're going to put it on Prime and release it. Well, they're not nuts. They're the smartest retailers in the world. So what do? They do it for limited theatrical release, then bigger theatrical release. Meanwhile, they made $50 million, $60 million before the Academy Awards, more than paid for their investment. Academy Awards come, they win, make it again, then they put it for pay-per-view, and only at the end of a long process does it show up on Prime for free. Now think about that. Some people would look at that and say, well, they don't get the digital world. I don't think that's accurate. I think they're just smart marketers. And we get confused sometimes between what we think is digital technology and just smart marketing.
So let's take a slight turn. Storytelling goes beyond what we would traditionally call television or movies, however they're distributed. You were a pretty hot gamer in your day, right?
Yeah, I used to pro game when I was in high school.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
So does being a pro gamer make you an expert in esports? What's the difference there, and why is that becoming so hot in this country?
Yeah, so we do a bunch of consulting in esports now, and have our own platform that we're launching with info. So just to really give a brief overview of the space, esports is sort of like, what people, at least on the market side, look at is like people viewing other people play games, which, for those of you with kids or are my age, you probably have seen it and been confused at why that's entertaining. But if you think about the cost to produce content of watching someone play games, it's pretty much nothing, which is incredible. So from a
good margins.
Yeah, great margins. And so, but the space is made up of people that are pro gamers, which a pro gamer at the top, at the top of their sort of game. Nowadays could make about $100,000 a year.
Well, I have the stat that League of Legends World Finals had 43 million viewers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah. So, but I think you'd have to be also like in terms of being careful around, being so there's pro gamers who a lot of them retire at around age 22. So no, I'm serious. Like you can't click fast enough at around age 22, and also your life is shaped less digitally than your counterparts that are 18 and are much faster. So a pro gamer has maybe 4 years of life, or maybe 6 years of life from 16 to around 22, and then pro gamers become streamers. So pro gamers develop sort of a brand around them, and then they start streaming on Twitch. And that revenue model looks like, and you actually get paid more as a streamer. So streamers can make, $200,000 plus, depending on how big you are. So then you have streamers. Then you have leagues, which are.
You still get pretty excited by this topic, by the way, it seems.
Oh, yeah. Then you have leagues. Yeah. But there's a lot of really interesting macro trends going on in esports. Some of you may have heard Overwatch is a Blizzard property that they're launching their leagues, and then Riot Games just announced last week that they're launching leagues as well. And basically what that means is if you think about major sports leagues like the NBA, for example, David's somewhere here, then there's only the NBA now. There's not, no one really follows like other basketball leagues, and so there's a scarcity of value there. And because esports has never had sort of like an official league, there's tons and tons of different leagues. So what they're doing is, which I think is really smart, is they're centralizing leagues into, one sponsored League of Legends league, one sponsored sort of Overwatch league, et cetera. So that's sort of the space. I think that's going to create a lot of, it's very interesting in terms of what they're asking in terms of investment. Lots of major sports leagues are, like the 76ers invested in a team. The Ted Leonsis at the Wizards, they invested in a team as well. So there's a lot of interesting things in the space.
But is there an advertising model there? Or how do they, David, how do you monetize?
Yeah. So we've looked at, there's an advertising model. You have 43 million people watching. There's always an advertising model. I think it has yet to be actually worked out. There's a sponsorship model, so there's an opportunity for brands to sponsor. Dell, one of my clients, we make Alienware, so it's one of the best pieces of hardware for real hardcore gamers. So that's a very important platform for us. All the gaming competitions are huge venues for us. So.
Yeah, I also think right now brands are still trying to figure out how to do advertising to esports. So the demographic it depends on how you cut it. Lots of different people have cut it, but it's about a $500 million segment this year. About 70 to 80% male, and almost all millennials. And most of the people that follow esports spend almost all their free time on esports. So it's a very attractive segment for advertisers, and they haven't figured out how to do it yet. Bud Light did something last year that was, it was a huge failure around esports, and part of it is, there's a lot of different stats around this too as well, but the best sort of stats that I've heard is that about 70% of people that follow esports have ad block. So you can't just reach out to them in traditional measures. And so these people are very technologically advanced, and they know how to get around advertising, and they prioritize authenticity above anything else. So if you look at doing just like a traditional commercial, you can't reach them with a commercial because they have ad block. And even if you do reach them, they probably just look at it as inauthentic anyways. So Red Bull's a great example of a brand that's done an amazing job at telling authentic brand stories around extreme sports, obviously, but they've done a great job in esports too as well. So I think there are a lot of different factors that make esports different than a traditional segment of advertising, but obviously, if people are watching it, it's a great.
Yeah, again, I think at the end of the day, all segments end up being the same because nobody wants to watch stuff that's not relevant. Nobody wants to watch stuff that interrupts. I think in particular, think about it, right? So we've gotten used to interrupting people because we think that that's what we do in digital. Can you imagine you're in the middle of watching an esports event and you interrupt them with something for Coke? Give me a break. It would be a disaster. Yeah.
You know what? I hate to interrupt you, but we only have a few minutes left, which shockingly we got through half of what we thought we would talk about, and that's amazing. But this reminds me of something I did want to touch on, which is this concept of filtering. So ad blocking, of course, is a filtering mechanism, but there are many other filtering mechanisms that we're all used to. Whenever you get a recommendation, for instance, relative to content, that's a filtering mechanism. And there are some that would say that there's a whole lot of filtering going on, and what happens is our world gets smaller and smaller and smaller because we're not being exposed to all potential relevant content, right? So is that a problem, and what do we do about it?
I think it's a huge societal problem. It's something I write about quite a lot. I think the problem is that the algorithms that are employed that supposedly are giving us what we want to watch continue to narrow the scope.
Right.
So you've seen guys like Mark Pritchard from P&G and others coming out and saying, wait a second, we've made a mistake. And by the way, Facebook is now saying this. Do not target too closely, too narrowly, because what's happening is you create an echo chamber, and that echo chamber gets smaller and smaller and smaller. So if you're not, Erwin Gottlieb of Group M always says that if the first time you expose somebody to a Mercedes-Benz is when they're 35 years old and they sort of fit 6 months before they buy a car. You put in all the algorithmic, important pieces, and that's the first time you expose them. They're not going to buy that car. But if when they're 17 years old, you first start exposing them to that car, by the time they're 35 and it's 6 months to go and they're going to buy, the chances they're buying have just exponentially grown. And I think, again, this is just marketing. It's got nothing to do with targeting, has nothing to do with digital, has nothing to do with authenticity. It just has to do with the smartness, because those were always issues that we had, right? Authenticity, again, go back and you can find people writing about the need to be authentic 50 years ago. So I think that the issue is that we're always in a place where we need to take relevance, authenticity, differentiation, make those things work for us. But the narrower you go, the less opportunity you have to expose people to more things. And I think we're making people stupid. Yeah. So forget the advertising. I think we just have a problem. We see it in the election. We see it in general in society. And this is a huge problem for us.
So you have following on that, you have a background that is very algorithm oriented, right? Yeah. So what are your thoughts on that? Are we already starting to go too far with data and artificial intelligence and algorithms and such? Is it we're actually at the beginning of a lot of the artificial intelligence movement, if you will.
Right.
So where's the future going, and what do you see as the positives or the biggest challenges with that as we become more and more oriented towards math?
Yeah, I think well, first of all, I think some of you guys probably read that Google's launching their own ad block product to sort of stifle the other ad block products, which I think is interesting. Sorry, side note on that. But in terms of algorithms creating more of a funnel, I think the incentive originally was that like Facebook and Google, which is like the duopoly in the ad world, they and the brands have always been incentivized by getting someone to click something. And people are generally going to be more incentivized to click something that relates to them, or so targeting works, and and that's why we've gotten into the specialization problem. The problem is that over the short term, it definitely works, but over the long term, you create people that are less educated by a large amount of sort of diversity of topics. So, and I think you look at like something like a BuzzFeed, which for a lot of for when they first came out, they were great at sort of clickbaiting. Again, a short run, great at sort of getting people to click on something, and then but long term doesn't really develop a loyal user base because there's no sort of staying power around just clickbait type stuff. So I think algorithms can fall into those same traps. I think like the data alone doesn't tell the story. Yeah. So exactly. You can't just give someone because they clicked on a short-term click. That means that that's the best advertising model. If you look at brands nowadays that do, I just was staying with a friend that runs an e-commerce company, is telling me that they're not doing email giveaways anymore, even though they've been hugely successful because it's bad for their brand. So they're thinking about things from a long-term perspective as well. So, yeah.
Which I love.
They're telling me to stop, but I can't help myself. One last quick question. So, for the people in the room, what do you think the most positive future holds? Because of the technology and the data and all that we have now, if you were everybody in the room, where is that positive? Where is that value? What would you do?
I think I would just continue to follow it down. We're in an incredible age because we have this ability to do what we've never been able to do before. We've taken everything that is true to the human DNA, our need to share, our need to communicate, the desire to be entertained, the ability to tell stories, and we've put this on steroids. And so the future's up to us. We can either take it and do something great with it, or we can take it and destroy the world. And we've seen that happen way too many times, right? So we've seen what happens with great technology. It goes towards destruction and war. Right now, we're going towards stupidity and I don't know whatever else. But I think that we're at this nexus where we can either look to the future and say, this is amazing, what am I going to do with it? Or we can get caught in the digibabble, continue to get stupider because we continue to live in the echo chamber. And I think we're just going to stifle ourselves and development of great stuff like Eden's working on.
So let's actually end there then. You are on the ground making this stuff that David's talking about. You are using all this great technology. You are responding to the market. Where do you see the most positive thing in the future?
Yeah, I go back to like storytelling at the end of the day. I think because we have, again, great ability for discovery, again, it's given power to the consumer to decide what's good and bad. So at the end of the day, like brands have more of a pressure to create great products. So I think everyone right now is looking for what's like after mobile. This is the 10-year anniversary of the iPhone coming up, and it's continued to grow. And people are thinking, what's like the next sort of framework that people are going to experience technology with? I think it's a good question, and I think there will be changes in
telepathy.
Yeah, exactly. There will be changes in the next 5 years, but I ultimately don't think it really matters. Whether you're on your mobile phone or whether you're using AR or VR or whatever, you have to tell a great story, whether it's experience or it's in front of your face, and it doesn't really matter to David's point. So I think we're working on creating a lot of just amazing experiences in VR and AR, but whether that's different than TV or what have you. It's kind of
great content. You both agree. Great content is what it's all about.
Great content, great products.
Right, absolutely. And that's great for this room because that's what you're all involved in, right? So let's thank our fantastic speakers.
Thank you.
It's wonderful. We have a 5-minute break. I'm not sure what one does in 5 minutes. And then we were going to come back and hear from our technology, media, and telecommunications leader, Mark, and Michelle Castillo from CNBC Digital. So come back in 5 minutes and we'll continue the show.
Hi, I'm Michelle Castillo. I'm a reporter at CNBC. I cover internet culture, advertising, media, so this entire report is up my alley.
And speaking of technology, what about the studio, right? Is this pretty cool or what, right? Who would have thought years ago PwC would have their own studio in here? I'm just doing a little shout out for the group back there. It's kind of amazing. A little white, but we'll work on color, okay?
So yeah, I thought the report was fascinating from a lot of different perspectives. I wanted to start out by pointing out that you guys found that you felt that entertainment and media growth is going to be pretty stagnant or pretty solid. It's not really increasing or decreasing. And the one thing that we really need is some kind of groundbreaking technology. People on average, according to Nielsen, spend 10 hours and 39 minutes a day consuming media. So if you factor in 8 hours of sleep, there's only 4 hours to do actual work or, I don't know, take a shower or do anything else like that. So there's really not much time left to increase your media consumption unless there is a disruptive technology, and as the report suggested, driverless cars. So I wanted to talk a little bit about that.
It's a great theory. Profitability will go up, but production in the workforce will have to go down because there's no other time to watch content. But I think, and just for the record, Deborah said that someone says everybody's a tech company. That's me, right? I think everybody deep down inside is a tech company, and definitely wants some of the tech valuations, just on a side note. But you have to look at, what is technology going to do? I think the group before did a great job of talking about everything that's going on. But we're living a bit of a story right now, right? We have our own epic drama of the content, producers, the providers, and then ultimately the users. And how is this all going to play out? And I think, when you really look at the day and age we're entering in, it's the user experience that's going to drive where we're going to go in the future. And we can't underestimate that. And creating ways to engage the user even more, readily is going to be based on technology. Technology is an enabler, right? And you start to look at things like, okay, what are people going to do if they're not actually driving their car? Are they, we probably have a little bit of a struggle with people who are absorbing too much content while they're driving their car, all right? But now that they don't have to drive their car, is that another opportunity for people to absorb content, absorb advertising, to look at other stuff, to control the eyeballs? And while driverless cars are, I think, a bit away, you have to look at that as, are there growth opportunities that technology innovation will drive down the road? And I think driverless cars is probably one example, right? Is there other ways to absorb video through other devices? We talk about the Internet of Things a lot, and ultimately, does that drive? Are you going to get advertisements on your refrigerator as you're opening it that you're out of milk, and by the way, this one's a little cheaper at the store down the block, and if you get there in the next 30 seconds, we'll give you another 40% discount. Are we going to get to that type of content absorption down the road? And the answer is yes. I don't know when, but I think innovation is going to ultimately play a big part of the driving of absorbing of content. And again, absorbing, taking into account the user experience has to be something that they want to do.
Yeah, speaking of that, I remember a couple of years ago at South by, Budweiser was showing up. Again, speaking of every company is a technology company, Budweiser had these fridges that would alert you when you were out of Bud, and you could press a button, and an online delivery service would bring you your shipment of whatever Budweiser beer you wanted. They also were testing like electronic billboards on grocery store aisles, so you could get coupons, as you mentioned. Yeah. If you just walk by and like, oh, I see you have chips. Do you want to get Budweiser with that? And they were testing some of that technology out.
Yeah, and we talk about big data and we talk about artificial intelligence, and I think we're really on the I would say edge of 2 years ago everybody was talking about big data, but no one really knew what it meant. And now we're starting to see, what does big data mean, right? And how powerful it can be. And ultimately it leads into AI, and it comes into some of those things around not only predicting, or telling somebody when you're out of beer, I got to be careful. I can't mention brand names. Sorry, I almost slipped there. But when you're out of beer, but it predicts down the road. Not only are you going to be out in a week from now, we think based on your current trend that you may go to a light beer. And therefore, we're going to predict that your next order, we're going to give you more of this. And getting into those kind of analytics is really powerful. We're not there yet, right? We're clearly not there yet. But to think about the what ifs is pretty extraordinary. And it's all going to be designed coming back to, people are going to have to control the, not control, but they want to get the attention of the user. They want to create that better experience. Why? Because that experience is going to be more valuable. That relationship is going to be really the value driver around the other two elements, players in the drama, which is the content creators and the providers.
So in the report, it said there were 4 main pillars that were driving entertainment and media growth, and that was internet advertising, internet video, video games, and internet access. And I just knowing that but at the same time, it seems that we're starting to reach saturation points in the world, and especially in the U.S. I mean, Netflix is pretty saturated in the U.S. already, although they might argue against that. What do you think it means that these are the 4 main pillars of growth, and what can they do to help increase the growth rate for entertainment and media?
Yeah, it's interesting. When you talk about the business models and you talk about the players, and you talk about the cost of content today, and then you talk about the ability to make money, whether it be advertising or subscriptions, and you really have to start to think we have to do this on a global basis, right? Critical mass is going to be key to driving the business models, and why the content's fairly expensive. I mean, it's expensive to maintain, it's expensive to localize, it's expensive to keep up. And doing so, I think when you think about these larger companies like Netflix or Amazon or some of the others out there, they're really going to look, number one, internet is clearly, going to be, or video demand on internet is going to be a big player, especially as other markets start to emerge. And for them to access that, I think is going to be very important, and you can see a lot of them are driving towards that. And it'll be interesting to see how it plays out in the business model, because that content can even get more expensive down the road if you have to do it in local versions, if you have to adhere to localization requirements, even if you have to store some of the data around who's viewing that content in a specific manner. It's going to drive up the cost of content tremendously. And again, I think it's all going to be to make this work. You're going to need critical mass of viewers in order to get the advertising dollars, to maintain that subscription stream at a level that works, right? If you want to go without advertising, that type of stuff. So it's interesting play out down the road, and it's interesting to see that we're, and as you mentioned the pillars, but we're showing flat, to small growth going down the road, but it really doesn't tell the whole story of the shift that's happening within those numbers, right? That we're moving from a TV-dominated, advertising world to a video-on-demand world, and still trying to figure out, is the content going to be a commodity part of it? Is the content going to be a value driver? How is the user going to react to all that? What are they going to be willing to pay for? I think the gaming industry in and of itself has dealt with this for a while, where a shiny new object on a video game, if you don't charge for it and it becomes popular, you've lost out on billions of dollars. If you try to charge for something that they don't want, they will go to the next game very quickly, and you've lost your whole user base. That relationship becomes extraordinarily important.
So speaking of content and this whole idea of the user experience, Netflix is spending $6 billion, I think, this year on content. Amazon is investing heavily, but they're also releasing content differently from how consumers expect traditional TV to air. So they don't have commercials. This whole season comes out. Speaking of the user experience, how is that? Are consumers changing what they expect now from traditional TV because of the popularity of these new disruptive businesses?
I think so. I mean, and if I haven't said it enough, I think we're in the day of the user, right? This is really about, trying to figure out what the user wants, right? And we were chatting a little bit beforehand and having a little fun with it. And I do, on a personal basis, separate the concept of a consumer and a user. A consumer actually pays for content or use. A user has access to it. And I think that's important because I'm a consumer in my household, but I have 5 other users, right? And therefore, they absorb content that I might not be willing to pay for, and distinguishing between the two, I think, is extraordinarily important. But I think at the end of the day, as you talk about the different forms, I don't think there's going to be one trick, right? I think as a user, I want the option. Right? There is some content, I want to go to the movie theaters. I want to sit in a cinema and I want to, okay, I'm a Trekkie, I want to watch the new Star Trek film in a cinema. I'm declaring it. When the next one comes out, I'm going to the movies. Then there's a group of movies that I'm never going to go to the movie theater. It's just not necessarily worth, me spending the money, getting out of the house, I could do something else. I'll probably watch them at home. I'll download them. And then there's a group of movies that I'll download on my device when I get on a plane because, one, probably my wife doesn't want to watch them, and it's more of a tech thing, and I could absorb that content kind of in and out, and it's not that important to me. But I want that option, right? And I think users at the end of the day are going to want the option to decide what content they want to absorb, where they want to absorb it, and when they want to absorb it. To repeat the TV isn't going away. There are still things that you want to watch on your TV set at home. I think sports is always going to be a big draw that you want to have that. If you're not at the game, you want to have that in-house experience with your friends and the social connection watching it there. So again, I think what we're driving towards now is a lot of trying to figure out where those boundaries are, understanding that probably you're going to have to offer multiple channels of different content in order to continue to engage the user and the consumer and get the money from the consumer. To get to that critical mass we talked about profitability, and that's where it gets interesting because that's not a cheap metric, right? And when you get into content and then having to offer it in different bundles or price it different ways, I think for every company that's out there, the concept of changing their entire infrastructure in order to handle maybe microtransactions versus subscriptions or bill on a different basis. I mean that's not a cheap thing to do, let alone the cost of the content that goes there. So again, I think we're in an interesting plateau as the model shifts, the user's demanding more, and the change is happening. And I like to say the change is going to happen with the user, not despite the user, right? And we have to pay attention to that user.
So another thing I found fascinating we're seeing these pockets of niche activity, kind of. For example, book sales are up. Amazon just opened their physical bookstore in Columbus Circle here in New York. In addition, physical music sales are still very popular in Japan, as the report showed. They still have a Tower Records, believe it or not. And a couple years ago, I think Billboard had a big feature on how record sales are coming up. I mean, if we're all about the user experience and there's an increase in these industries. I mean, I know they are like older technologies, but should companies chase those consumers, especially because a lot of them skew young?
Back to the future, right?
Yeah.
First of all, and I have to say it, I always get excited at the bookstore, and I love going to a bookstore. I was a single dad, and I was raising 2 daughters on my own, and that used to be our thing. We used to go to the bookstore every Saturday night, hang out in there, and we had a great experience with it, right? And one's an English major now in college, and the other is going into law school. So I feel, even looking back, that physical bookstore experience just was so awesome, right? And to hear that a company is thinking about going back into that, I think it just excites me because, again, it offers up a different user experience. It's ironic because that same company probably did in the bookstore, right? But now you come into the, let's create, now that we have an opportunity, let's create a better user experience. I would think they have bigger plans for this, and who knows if it gets into a VR type of element or an AR or something along those lines. But I think, in that case, it's taking what they have and expanding that user experience. I think, and this gets into the difficulty of the content down the road too, is you do have these niche players, you do have these niche countries. South Africa is big on cinema, right? And it's something cultural within that country that they love going to the movies. That's not going to change. It's always going to be an anomaly in the statistics. Japan loves, the vinyl records. They still like going to the bookstore. It's something in that culture that drives it. And that comes back to the, do you chase the niches or do you chase the masses? And that's a decision companies are going to have to make. And again, knowing that relationship around the niche, it may change overnight. And that's what it comes back to, the technology, full circle, trying to understand the niche today might not be the niche a couple months from now, or if I'm going to go out and produce a bunch of vinyl records, do I really know that that's going to be around a year from now, and I'm not going to be stuck, with a whole bunch of these in my warehouse somewhere that I don't know what to do with, and then you get into the, everybody's got to buy a record player too, by the way, because they haven't changed that technology, so but it's fun, and it's something that's predictive. And it's going to be an interesting question to see down the road whether how many people go to the niches, and does that create maybe an opportunity for smaller players in the industry, or do we see an increase? The masses will control the destiny.
Speaking of a niche that's growing right now, the two big industries that you thought were going to grow a lot were esports,
yes,
and VR. I think esports was something like around 24% growth, and by 2021, and but VR, you were expecting something like 70% growth in consumers that have headsets, and these aren't Google Cardboards; these are actual VR headsets. Most of them will be smartphones as well. That's obviously a growing industry. Is it too early to invest now, though, because it's still really low numbers?
I never like to give investment advice, right? I've been told as an accountant I should never give investment advice, but the reality is, the growth numbers are definitely there. We're starting from fairly small numbers, so when you talk about these percentages, they're going to be, a little bit out of whack compared to everything else. I think some will take some time. I think the user experience or the UX around virtual reality and VR, it's there, but it's not overwhelmingly defined today. So we're going to have to see the technology develop on that to really get to its true potential. I think it's out there. Do I think we're at the Star Trek level of it yet? No. Will that come down the road? Yes, I think inevitably it will. Do we see some cinemas trying to start to invest into that area? Yes. They might be too early. That's the trick with technology. A little too early, you're dead. A little too late, you're dead. You got to time it right, at the time. So we'll see on that one. Some of the other technologies, we'll see how they play out. I'm not sure, I guess is what the answer I want to say is. We're just going to have to wait and see how these things come along, how fast, and whether they continue to gather the level of interest that we expect them to. But we don't also know technology-wise what's going to develop on the days. I know I'm watching the clock here. I got a couple people probably about to raise their hand back there. So. Well,
I did want to bring up something about VR that I've been fascinated about. It's a very solitary experience right now. You're in your headset, you're in your world. I have seen a couple of things that I thought were interesting. I went at Tribeca, kind of did like a VR cafe where different VR experiences set up their own booth, and you can go in and you can go to different booths and experience different VR videos. I've heard of like movie theaters where there's like a signal, everyone has to put on their VR headset at the same time. Obviously you can't walk around or you'll have a mass crowd running into each other. Do you think that's going to limit VR? just because it's so solitary, or is it just a different kind of media now?
I think it's a different kind of media now. I mean, I think right now we're at the beginning stages of the technology around it, and so it's going to be a little bit on the limited UX and limited customer experience. But I think the technology itself will get better, it'll get stronger, it'll get faster, the experience will become more pronounced. And I think in those days, when those days start to come, you'll see, again, coming back to the masses, we'll start to move in that direction for a better user experience around it. Because it will, if it is done in let's say cinemas, then people may go to the movies more because they can have a better experience there. They may change the price point on it. So hopefully some of this stuff starts to produce in the next few years.
Well, thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, this has been great. And it's been a pleasure meeting you too. I've really enjoyed some of our conversations before this. So thank you for coming in.
Thank you for speaking today.
All right, so I would like to point out we're right on time too.
Yeah, I know. I was like...
So with that, we're going to shift to our next session. My colleague Christina is going to come up. I think she's somewhere here in the wings, and she's got two people, Alex and Matt from. I'll let you introduce them. All right. Thank you. I think we're down this way. Thank you, everybody.
Okay, come on up, guys. Okay, so I'm joined here today by Alex Blumberg, co-founder and CEO of Gimlet Media, and by Matt Lieber, co-founder and president of Gimlet. And I am super excited. I hope you've been able to tell all morning. I'm so excited. I can't wait to talk to you.
Yes.
Because you guys have a really fresh and interesting take on, I think, at least 3 of the themes that are coming out of the Entertainment and Media Outlook this year. You're rethinking the fan experience in podcasting. You are actually developing a Swiss Army knife of new business models that I think are really interesting. And as we've talked about previously as we prepped, you're tapping into new hours in a media user's day. And that's the way you find growth in a media market that, as we've seen earlier from Stephanie, is increasingly saturating. So I'm so glad you guys are here. We have a lot to talk about. We have 20 minutes.
All right.
Maybe, Alex, you can start us off. I think there's probably a lot of Gimlet fans in the audience, but probably also some folks that don't know Gimlet.
Yeah.
Talk to us about Gimlet a little bit, and as the founder, what was the opportunity that you saw in podcasting?
Sure. So how many people listen to podcasts here? Okay.
There
So
you
we are a digital media company focusing on audio, focusing on podcasts. And my co-founder Matt and I started the company about 3 years ago. And we came to it from some different. We started in similar backgrounds, and we came to it and then sort of took different routes to each other and to the company. I come from a background. This is the first full-time job in the private sector I've had since high school. When I was a grocery store bagger. For most of my career, I was a nonprofit journalist in public radio. I worked at This American Life, and I worked at NPR, and it was there, and we started podcasting sort of early on, and I was able to see the enthusiasm around digital audio and just the growth, and I just saw it from a creator's perspective. Like, just people we just saw increasing adoption, increasing excitement. I would go and we would do live shows at the show called Planet Money that I started, and people would come up and ask for my autograph. And in 15 years in public radio, nobody had ever asked for my autograph before. So I thought something's happening here. At the same time, and I decided there needed to be more. We needed to make more of this kind of programming. So I decided I wanted to go out on my own and start a company. At the same time, Matt was sort of having similar realizations from a different perch in the business world. Do you want me to do you? Yeah.
No, yeah. I mean, like the insight that we were both, Alex was making podcasts, I was listening to a lot of podcasts and realizing that, so if you look at the history of media, every time a new technology comes along that offers a new channel for distribution, a new media company gets built, right? And you can go back to the 1920s when radio was the technology that got uptake was very quick, and that's when CBS got built. And in the 1980s, the technology was cable, and that's when CNN got built and MTV got built. And so we were sort of watching this new channel for on-demand digital audio materialize, and I was saying, like, someone's going to build the company that defines the age of digital audio, and I want to do that. I told enough people that someone said, oh, you should meet this other guy.
Because that's what I was talking about too. Yeah.
And that was 3 years ago when we started Gimlet, which is a podcast network that focuses on premium, high-quality storytelling podcasts like Startup, which was the first show we did, which was really a documentary about what it's really like to start a company.
About you guys starting
a documentary about us.
A company.
And that was sort of like innovation number one at Gimlet was go to market, make a documentary about yourself as a go-to-market strategy, and it worked wonderfully. That was our first show, and it's now still one of our biggest franchises.
Super successful.
And now we have other shows across Reply All and Technology, Crime Town and True Crime. Homecoming is a scripted series starring Catherine Keener and Oscar Isaac. And so the idea is, can you tell big immersive stories in this new medium and build franchises that have real audiences and attract brand advertising?
Yeah. So from startup 3 years ago, fast forward to now, you're a podcasting network now, and as you said, 13 shows. How do you scale innovation from being something very founder-centric and centered on the two of you to something bigger and scalable?
Yeah, so if you look at the innovations that Gimlet brought, I think one is, we talked about this earlier, that when a new medium comes along, you have to have a new way of telling stories. There's a new formats and new ways to bring creativity to bear. And so really, Alex can talk about that, but like doing on-demand audio is fundamentally a different medium, a different format than doing linear audio, which is what we've lived with for radio for the last 100 years. And so there's a different way of storytelling. I'd say the other thing is we created a new ad product. So like another fundamental innovation is we thought we want advertising to be incremental and additive to the experience of listening, because it'll be a better experience for the audience. And so we created a new ad product, which was a story-driven, produced, host-read mid-roll. And so, I think Alex, you created.
This sort of came out of necessity when we first started the company. We didn't, I had left these big media companies like NPR and This American Life that had, multiple millions of listeners, and we were out on our own, and I had like 4 Twitter followers, and so we just needed to do something to generate attention. And so the only thing going on in our lives was that we were starting this company, and it was really scary. So we documented that. And then as we started documenting it, we realized this is a great story, and nobody ever tells this part of business formation. That's the story of business formation, which is actually a story of late nights and anxiety and constant questioning if you're crazy or not. And also like having your family constantly question if you're crazy or not. And we incorporated that into the story, and it found an audience. And we thought of it as nothing but a marketing gimmick, but then we realized, wait a minute, this is our first podcast, this is our first product. So then we thought, okay, how are we have to put an ad on this. What does the ad look like? And it became, we wanted the ad to feel consistent. We wanted it to do work for the client, but also not be disruptive. And so that sort of was, and so I did the same thing with the ads that I was doing with the story. We found a company, NerdWallet. It was our very first sponsor, and I went to their offices, and I started just documentary interviewing the people who worked at NerdWallet about what it was like to work at NerdWallet and what they did, and we made a very sort of human ad product for this brand, and it was and that felt like, oh, we're onto something here too. This can bring the power of audio to the client, in that audio is a very intimate experience. You're listening with your headphones in. You hear the people, and it can do a lot of work humanizing a brand and bringing people, sort of like in close contact with that brand. And so that became sort of a template of a kind of ad
And so we've since built a whole scalable system and a client services, creative services organization that can deliver that so the clients are now, Ford Motor Company and Apple, Dell, Lenovo, Virgin Air.
And you're building podcasts for them now, right? Like for Virgin Atlantic?
Right, so first we created a new ad product, then sort of second was we had brands coming to us who wanted to do whole shows, so we create whole productions under a separate brand, Gimlet Creative.
Yeah.
So we've done that for eBay with Open for Business, for Virgin, for Tinder. We have Microsoft coming soon. And we've doubled the output on branded podcasts this year over last year. And now, and we're also thinking about, we're starting to now develop new products for new audio platforms. Because if you're a brand today, right, like when we started the company, the idea is we're seeing a lot more listening, right? We're seeing over the last 2 years, we've seen 40% growth in the number of monthly active users in podcasts in this market. And so if you're a brand, more people are listening to audio, and it means you need to think in new ways about how you sound and what story you're telling, not only in podcasts, but also on Spotify and Pandora and Amazon Alexa and Google Home. And sort of having an audio strategy is something that becomes a big opportunity and more important for brands. So we're also developing new products across products.
I want to go back to the native advertising, which is your business model. And you talked a little bit about keeping the podcasts, the branded podcasts, separate from your own shows. Mm-hmm. But as you run ads in your shows, what's the line that you guys tread between editorial content and editorial control and sponsored content?
Well, I mean, that, again, coming from the world of journalism as I do, and media in general, we wanted to be very, very careful that what we're giving a quality experience for the listener and a quality experience for the brand, but also not confusing anybody about what is editorial content and what is brand driven. And so the way we solve that is that, and our hosts read the ads. That's what makes them effective. But that also sort of ups the ante. You have to be very, very clear when the regular programming stops and when the ad begins. So we do a couple things. We always say an hour word for some sort of signaling language, and then we always put music under the ad so that it's an identifiable sort of ad theme under the ad, so that people will always know that when they're listening to an ad, when it's somebody else's words and not our own editorial words. But it's that's the exciting thing about starting a new company, starting this in this new world, is that there are rules that are there for a very good reason. You need to uphold your editorial integrity, but the rules were established 50, 100 years ago in this sort of legacy media organization. So we needed to come up with what are the rules that can be just as ironclad, just as that guarantee our integrity, but are sort of more attuned to the new world in which we live.
Mm-hmm. One of the reasons I think Gimlet is very special is because you've created this pretty unique user experience where, as a listener, I really feel like I have a personal connection to your shows, to your hosts. Mm-hmm. And can you talk a little bit about how you do that?
Yeah, I think that's one of the powers of audio. I think I've worked in print. We did a TV show at This American Life. I was the executive producer who won 2 Emmys. It was 2 seasons, and I've worked in audio my whole life. And I've come to believe that different media have different strengths. And audio, I think its core strength is that, let me just say, how many people have heard my voice in this room? If you've listened to it, okay. Do I look like what you thought I would look like? No, right? And that's very powerful because you heard my words, and then in your mind you created a vision of me that is different than I actually am. But what that means is that you were hearing my actual words, but in that act of creation of me, my words became, in some small way, a part of you. And so you can identify with me better. And what that means, I think, about audio is that it is the most empathetic medium. It has the superpower of audio is that it can create understanding between people. TV, I worked in TV for 2 years. I've been involved in TV projects. TV is great at conflict, but it is not super great at empathy. Audio is great at empathy. And so I don't think it's a surprise, and we select for that. When we are deciding which pieces of an interview to keep, we are going to zero in on the pieces that are emotionally honest, because that is what works. And if you select a piece that is not emotionally honest, people are bored by it. They want people being honest. And so when you are listening to when you're listening to something audio, you are hearing people's most honest feelings, because that's what works in audio. And that creates a bond between the listener and the host.
But I think you're also helping that bond a little bit along, because you're allowing your fans and your users to call into or leave voicemails for the podcasts, right? You
Well,
make follow-up episodes sometimes.
They feel like they're friends with you, and I think in many ways they are. Like in times that I've been on the podcast where I've shared very, very intimate details. Matt and I, when we first did the first season of Startup, we actually recorded our equity negotiation on tape and broadcast it to the world. We recorded arguments with our spouses on tape and broadcast it to the world. We were revealing very real human moments, and so people feel like they're friends with us because they are. We have if you listen to Startup, you knew me better than a lot of my longtime friends who didn't listen to Startup because I was revealing very real things. So that bond is very real, and so people want to interact with you, and it's a no-brainer that we create areas where people can interact, where we have people call into the show. We go and we do live events where people can show up. And I talked about the autographs. I think that's a big part of the autographs, right? There's a feeling of that they know you, that you're their friend.
If you look at why people listen to podcasts and what the use cases are, what we see is the primary use cases is you're listening on your commute, on your way into work or your way home from work. You're listening during your workout, or you're listening while you're cooking or doing something else. But and we design for those use cases, right? So the average length of a commute is 20 to 40 minutes. Average length of a workout, 20 to 40 minutes. But the episodes of our show, 20 to 40 minutes. And if you think about that person, on their way to work in the morning, the podcast is offering them companionship. It's like having someone, it's like having Alex or Wendy from Science Versus, or PJ and Alex from Reply All, or Jonathan from Heavyweight. It's like having them in the passenger seat of the car, kind of along the ride with you. And when we're making show, it's not the only thing. We think podcasts are also great at telling stories, and we think they're great at helping people understand. And so we really want you to come away having learned something. But the companionship thing is something we select for. When we're hiring a host or making a new show, it's is this someone you'd want to hang out with for an hour on your commute? If yes, interesting. If no, not a Gimlet show.
I was actually wondering about how closely the personalities of your hosts resemble the personalities of who you think the fans are. Is there any connection, you think? Or is it more of that everybody interprets into?
I think there's a certain there's a hosty quality. I think the microphone loves certain people the same way the camera loves certain people. And I think what works as a host is relatability, is emotional honesty. And I think that's across anybody who works in talk radio. I think Howard Stern has it. I think Rush Limbaugh has it. I think that, Ira Glass, at This American Life has it, and I think our hosts have it too. When they share their feelings with you, it feels authentic.
You talked a little bit, Matt, about the use cases when people listen to podcasts. That was actually going to be one of my questions, is where do you get consumer time from? Because obviously, as a media user, I only have so many hours in my day. I mean, I watch so much video already, I consume the news. What more time can I give?
Yeah, so I mean, that's one of the sort of themes as we're seeing a plateau in time spent with media, right? It's a lot of time. It's whatever it is, I don't know, 12, 13, 14 hours a day. But there's this final frontier, this last part of people's day that is still relatively untouched by screens. And it's actually a lot of time. It's 2.5 hours a day. And that's the amount of time you're commuting, you're working out, you're cooking, doing chores, you may be mowing the lawn. You're doing another activity. And audio is the only medium that you can consume while you're doing something else. So that opens up a big new window of time.
Yeah, you've just created another 2.5 hours in the attention economy.
Right, so we're partly stealing share from television. You'll be listening to us instead of having passive television on in the background that you're not watching. You'll be listening to us instead of radio. And we also, there's all these new distribution endpoints, right? I listen now on these AirPods, and I'll be able to listen at times when otherwise I wouldn't have. So it fits into new parts of the day, but there's that big chunk too, which is just new time available that we're going after.
That's great. That's a really great opportunity to go after. Now, you pulled out your device, and we talked a little bit about distribution and having to be on platforms such as Amazon's Alexa. One thing I noticed is that your shows are actually also available on on other shows that I would think are a little bit competitive, like Radiolab or Planet Money. Can you talk a little bit about what the thinking behind that is?
I mean, the thinking behind that is that we're early days here. Like, I mean, you were showing sort of like the trend lines and sort of like the categories, and like and I was looking at the audio one, and it was like radio and it was music, yeah. And I was like,
We're going to get to
that.
We talked about
this.
this.
Show that slide where we're not there.
Yeah.
We're
Or
like,
else.
No, I mean like.
Or else, right?
Exactly. Or else for us. No, but I think so. I think the it's very clear that that's like a growing part. I'm sorry, I forgot your question. Now I got it.
You're on
right.
Radiolab
Yeah, so
and you're
we're-
on Planet
yes.
Money, so
So
why are
we're-
you putting your content there?
So we are. So we all believe we're at early days here. Like that. This is the beginning of essentially the second golden age of audio. Like David was talking about, like the first golden age came when the radio came along. People didn't know what to do. They sort of slowly figured it out and started programming towards it. And then sort of radio calcified as TV came along, and that became the thing. We are now, on demand has come to audio. It's come to audio late. And what that creates is all these opportunities to tell different kinds of stories that we were never able to tell before. So we feel like there's just a whole world that's about to explode. We're part of it, and so that means that like all we want to do is help each other grow, because we're not stealing market share from anybody. We're growing this pie.
The
And so
number
we can-
one
Got
way
it.
that listeners learn about new podcasts is from other
From
podcasts.
podcasts, yeah.
So we're happy to be in front of other podcast audience to tell them about what we're doing and bring them into the Gimlet world.
Got it. We're at time. Unfortunately, I could keep going with this for a while longer. My last question is around your vision for the future. Gimlet, 5 years out, what are you going to look like?
We're going to look. I mean, I think we're going to be the destination for premium audio quality in the industry. I think the industry is going to continue its ascent. It's growing, double digits year over year, and it's like already sort of like a word that used to be sort of a weird buzzword when we started, and now is more and more into the mainstream. That's just going to continue to happen, and we're going to be the premier.
You're going to own it.
Yeah,
own
we're
the
going to own it.
space.
Yeah.
Got it. Thank you so much for being
Thanks for
here
having us.
today.
Yeah,
That was
thank
really
you.
cool.
Yeah.
Next up are my colleague Chris Fulmer. He's going to be talking to Linda Yaccarino, and another fascinating conversation coming up. So thank you guys.
Thanks so much.
Well, thank you, Christina, and thank you, Linda, for joining us today. Thrilled to have you here at our Global Outlook launch. And
Thank you for having me. Appreciate
very
it.
excited to hear your perspective on a variety of things. Linda is the chairman of advertising and sales partnerships for NBCUniversal. It's an incredible portfolio of entertainment properties. Can you describe just the breadth of the portfolio for us?
Yes, I certainly can try. I don't think it's changed since this morning when I was at the office, but it may have. But we have assets that I would say what I'm responsible for, give or take 5 or 10%, depending on if it's an Olympic year or not, responsible for about $10 billion worth of ad revenue a year, which includes, main linear networks, digital platforms that span from NBC, which is one of our 2 broadcast networks, English language, obviously, Telemundo, Spanish language, but a whole host of news networks, MSNBC, CNBC, and obviously Today's Show, et cetera. But then we have our sports networks and related sports properties, for example, our exclusive relationship with the NHL or our relationship with the NFL. I mentioned Olympics, but then cable entertainment properties. So big players in cable, USA, Bravo, E, Sci-Fi, Oxygen, and down the line. And then we have a lot of our digital platforms. So if we look at what's owned and operated by NBCUniversal, from Fandango to Golf Now, but now new to our portfolio, we have our relationships where NBCUniversal takes the outward-facing lead to advertisers in terms of Vox, BuzzFeed, Apple News. We are the exclusive, partner for monetizing Apple News. And then obviously our most recent investment in Snapchat being the only strategic partner during their IPO process. And then we have a lot of exclusive content with them and a great and growing relationship. So, our assets from what is owned and operated by NBCUniversal at any given time, I would say, to put it in perspective, is anywhere from 20 to 24% of available audiences, depending on what you're looking for, at any given time in the month. So if it's 18 to 49, 25 to 54, a more specific target like a car intender, car purchaser. But we know very specifically we can give our advertisers a lot. But we also know we can't give them everything they need to help them sell product. And that would be the reason behind all of our new phase of partnerships, again, from AOL and BuzzFeed Vox to most recently Apple News and Snapchat. So that kind of expands what we can offer our customers. So that's really what we've been doing to try to focus on what's that $10 billion portfolio. What does it mean to anyone? We want to offer them as many audiences and active consumers as possible.
Well, our outlook this year puts a big emphasis on user experience and the strategic importance of user experience. How companies like yours create that winning combination of content, distribution, and technology. And given what you just described and the importance of user experience, how do you bring those capabilities together, both for users and for advertisers, to deliver that winning proposition?
Well, I would say, first of all, I've been at the company just about 5 years. And when I got to the company, NBCUniversal was really a byproduct of a series of mergers and acquisitions. So if you had, I'm not sure, the benefit of being one of our customers, you have the opportunity in any given day to meet with 15 different people from NBCUniversal. And we made a very good specific effort to make sure that it was 15 different times. So we have really tried, which really, I think we've gotten a lot better at that, making it much easier for us to do business. So we formed this one portfolio. So you can talk to a few people, very few people, one, maybe two or three if you have some specifics, but to be able to look at our whole portfolio from one evangelist on behalf of NBCUniversal. So we got that done. We invested a tremendous amount of money, and I mean hundreds of millions of dollars, in unifying our infrastructure. So if we wanted to represent to you as one portfolio, but you couldn't buy NBCUniversal and Telemundo on the same proposal, that didn't make a whole heck of a lot of sense. So we fixed that part. Then in the last, I would say, 3 years, a real focus and concentration on technology and data investment, from our deal with our sister company or parent company, Comcast, to deal with them or partner with them on the utilization and productize the Comcast set-top box data, to technology capabilities that basically makes this differentiated position of NBCUniversal from a scale perspective, but takes that scale and makes it smart. So what TV has been dogged with the last bunch of years, particularly from an unfortunate, I would say, press narrative, that TV can't deliver the data and targeting that national marketers crave, but now we can. But they have this precious, unprecedented, undeniably strong premium content, right? So now we're bringing the both together. So we say you get the scale of the biggest collection of premium content, but we've now activated it and made it smart. So you can buy and sell or transact in the most sophisticated, efficient, accurate way that exists today in television. Is it perfect? Is it best? Is it completely automated like a Google and a Facebook? No. And I don't know how quickly or how much we'll be able to get there, because I think you continue to need that human touch, right? To contextually place the right content at the right time on the right channel for everything from Sunday Night Football to Saturday Night Live to, I'm sure, what will be the much talked about 10th anniversary of the Kardashians coming up. Can you believe it?
Can't wait.
Yes.
It's a very competitive marketplace. You're right in the middle of a very competitive marketplace. Many other large ad-supported media companies would say many of the same things. They're investing in technology, they're investing in data, they've reorganized. At the core, you mentioned smart and scale together. What is it that really differentiates the proposition when you're in the room with agencies and marketers that you're bringing?
I really do think it's the sweet spot from what we talk about all the time, which is content, data, and distribution, right? If you don't have the scale, you could be really great at it. But if you don't have the scale, you can't be talking to national marketers that say, I can help you drive, no pun intended, test drives. I can help you move product off the shelf. When you have the scale that NBCUniversal has, if you could layer on it, data-driven capabilities that's fueled by Comcast set-top box data, let's talk about it. You got a Nielsen panel that I think this year expanded to 45,000 versus a Comcast set-top box data set that's 23 million. Okay, so that alone differentiates you. If you can productize it or offer it to the advertiser, where you can optimize your media plans, that include everything from the heft of NBCUniversal to bring in other partners, Apple News, BuzzFeed, Snapchat, et cetera, then you're really talking what an advertiser is looking for. You don't have to worry about any of the brand safety or measurement issues that are going on. Check the box, got that. And you have the immediacy of this scale and the ability to deliver a message that truly helps sell product. So you know what's been going on out in the marketplace, whether it's a new study that came out that just really, I have to say, debunks a bunch of the myths about the power of digital. Not that it's not important. We haven't, in the last, I would say 18 months, we've invested over $3 billion in our digital partnerships, but it's that media mix that really is important to prove and have great proof of capabilities to the national marketers, and that premium content absolutely has to come first. You can, what was talking about, they're only good at brand awareness, top of the funnel. You want to know something? There's a lot of math that says a quarter of the attribution to that bottom of the funnel or last click attribution should be going to, let's call it television content, right? So I think the power of premium content, which is the real soul hub or driver or heartbeat of NBCUniversal, which is just keep investing in that premium content, then layered on with the data distribution at scale. That's the differentiator for NBCUniversal. And if you look what's out in the marketplace, whether it's the new consortium that's been developed by Fox, Turner, and Viacom, which we applaud, which is OpenAP, I think it's a great step in the direction as there's a complete acceleration of shift to audience selling or consumer segmenting, targeting way beyond age and gender that we're currently limping around with in the marketplace with a C3 or C7 currency. We applaud that. The opportunity at NBCUniversal is quite different because we're already in the market. They have a lot of development to do. We keep an eye on it, and when they're ready, we'll partner with them. We're very open to it, but we're already out in the marketplace with an optimizer that's able to make so efficient your media buy that I can guarantee improvements over last year. Improvements that are the business targets that national marketers are looking for. That being said, that's why we had to really put a stake in the ground and make a big announcement that we availed $1 billion of inventory to...
Yeah, you're guaranteeing them on different metrics now.
We knew that if we were going to change or challenge, I think is the right word, challenge legacy, and it's the legacy or this inertia that we fight in the industry all the time, that said, it's really a question mark. What does a C3 rating do anyway? Besides that, you have to wait 3 weeks for it. Really? You have to wait 3 weeks for a guess of how many people might have watched your show, how many people by sex or gender that might have watched your show. Not how many people may have walked into your showroom and test driven your car, or not how many people reacted to your day and date promotion that aired in the new NBCU hit World of Dance, right? I could find that data out in a couple of days that proved the efficacy of that platform. And if it didn't work, I could react and iterate and give you more stuff, right? So we had to at least communicate to the ad community that we had the capacity to transact on that level, and that we were willing to put our money where our mouth was, carve out $1 billion worth of industry to in inventory to transact with our clients. I don't think any other media company that has these tools that they're building, which we're supportive of, can transact at a level or a capacity of those numbers or of those proportions.
So that reinforces the differentiation around content, technology, data.
Yes.
That's
And I
different
think
about what you bring now.
It also reinforces NBCUniversal's commitment to premium content at scale, and we spent a whole hell of a lot of time making that scale smart.
Right. I'm very intrigued by the investments the company has made in digital, the partnerships that you have. You mentioned Apple News.
Yeah.
I think you just announced another news product with Snap.
Snapchat, yep.
Just recently. But when you take a step back and you look at sort of the landscape around digital and particularly mobile advertising, so much of it lands in the laps of a couple large players.
Yeah.
How much do those?
A couple of large players, 85 cents of every dollar being sent at the duopoly of Google and Facebook. So that might be the elephant in the room.
Right. How much though how much are you seeing, commercially, the fact that you have these other relationships, that you have these other assets, start to change the game for you guys and talk differently about your premium content, your audiences when they're not on your owned and operated assets?
I think the most important thing that we noticed and growing over the last, I'm going to say 24 months, is the desire from the national advertisers to have an alternative, okay? And a lot of that is driven by a series of layered on mishaps, questions, oops, bots, fraud. If you look in this morning's New York Times paper, does anyone say paper anymore? I'm going to say paper and own it. But in the New York Times, Sapna wrote an article just about another challenge. I don't know if anyone saw it around bots or fake likes on Instagram and fake influencers on Instagram. Think about the disrespect to the consumer. Therefore, the I think ethically questionable conversations that you have with a marketer when that is continually going on. That's in addition to the walled garden of data that, for whatever point, driven many of those companies to go, oops, I counted it wrong. Oops, the algorithm did it. NBCUniversal, it cannot be in that type of position.
Do you think we're at a real pivot point in the industry
because
of these issues around bots and viewability and
I want to say I
traffic?
hope so, because quite frankly, even we're a member of the IAB board, I think their standards are way too low. So I don't want to be, as the one of the heads of the biggest media company in the country, the standards need to be equal. But I don't think it's right to lower the standards by which television is measured, right? Why are we lowering our standards? It's only going to water down results for advertisers and then make your first question was viewer experience. Mm-hmm. It's only going to make for a worse or whether it's an inappropriate viewer experience or the wrong messages, therefore irrelevant and weaker outcomes for the marketers. So I hope we're at an inflection point, but I've read a couple of different articles from, let's call it media prognosticators or companies like yourself, where let's call it traditional media revenue will begin to moderate or maybe decrease, and the growth of digital is going to increase, right? But slow down from where it's been. So not the 30 to 40% a year, maybe to 10 to 20%. I find that astounding versus, in comparison or acknowledgement of all the mishaps, from frauds, bots of viewability. Look, you know your own behavior. I'm scrolling through my newsfeed. We know our own behavior. So you can only imagine what the real impact of people who are watching or not watching. So you have to look at time spent, you have to look at impact, you have to look at awareness, and how many people are really sitting to watch your spot. I was at a conference a couple of weeks ago, and someone from a not-to-be-named big digital company said, we really need to spend time on transforming creative and making effective creative that is only going to be viewed for 1 second. So I was like jumping out of my skin because I was sitting over there waiting to go up next. I'm like, I got to make something perfectly clear. Don't waste any of your creative time doing that, because it's not going to work. So then, of course, I flip side, maybe shilled for my own company a little bit. But I said, when you have something, 5 years ago, Steve Burke and Brian Roberts were chided or questions for who the hell would buy a broadcast network this day and age. And look at how the tables have turned, right? And look at a broadcast network that is able to bring a show out in 2016 that if you look on, whether you want to look at over a 7-day period, a 10-day period, a 15-day period, you're looking at double-digit ratings that include watching your commercials for a show like This Is Us. So when you make great content and great creative, people show up. And really what they do is populate those news feeds and create the buzziest events or talked about today's version of the water cooler. I mean, how much do you think that show, which I think the pilot episode to date is something nearing a 20 rating, right? But if you look at whether it's Alec Baldwin or Kate McKinnon every week, that's what's fueling those platforms from a content perspective. So I would expect NBC will continue fueling that. But I think your original question, we could talk about our new, I think it's probably going to come to market within the next 3 to 6 weeks, daily Snap News show, first ever. So the coming together of the #1 collection of news brands in the country with the hottest platform that can reach the target demos that
Is that
we...
all of the NBC News brands, or
Yeah,
a handful?
it's not going to be branded, whether it's CNBC or MSNBC. It's all original, but it will be branded. We're not really sure what we're going to call it yet. It could be, I don't even know. Yeah. NB News Today, they might be Snap in there somewhere. I have no idea. We're testing a bunch of things, but it's geared to the Snap audience, which is something that NBC has a gap in reaching, but it will be fueled and powered by NBC talent and writers and reporters. I think you'll see a new host, maybe that you see doing a little roving reporting on one of our channels now. So that's a big, and it's going to be daily, so that's a big and new exciting initiative for us. But then you have, Jimmy coming out, SNL, and we have the Rundown on Snap, which has, I think it's doing about 5 million views every time it's on. It's 2 days. We may go to 5 days. Insatiable demand for all things Hollywood. So we're learning, we're testing, but we're partnering with them and learning from them. It's really the expedience to market that we're learning a lot from them about, because if you look at something like a This Is Us, that was in development for well over a year. They get upset if it takes more than 4 hours to bring a piece of content to their consumers. So we had a great experience with the Olympics, and there's going to be a lot more to come in that area.
So lots of innovation in product, tying again back to the user experience, lots of new experiences for fans of NBCUniversal. There's also lots happening in terms of advertising innovation, the user experience of advertising, and you have also been innovating there in terms of, I'm sure, changing the amount of advertising people may see, the kinds of advertising they may see, and even working more closely with brands in terms of connecting them to your creative talent. Can you talk about how much of that is really material or could be material to your business, these new forms of advertising?
I think what's material, and it's a really great question, and that's what we see as the next kind of narrative that people will be talking a lot about. I think what's material is every time we've done it or tested, the results are consistent and they are overwhelmingly better, no shocker, than a 5 or 10 minute commercial, a 10-minute commercial pod. So SNL's the easiest example. We cut the commercial load by 30%. We went into, business where we're working closely with advertisers to attach to SNL, and it's done its highest ratings in 24 years. It might have something to do with election-related content, but good example. I was waiting to be like, are you kidding? It might be Alec Baldwin and Kate McKinnon. But so there's a lot of spectacular success. I think you read a lot of other companies saying they've cut back on commercial load. You need to be really careful because those companies completely violated, I think, an accepted relationship with their consumer and went way over the accepted norm in the business to make up for ratings loss. NBCUniversal never did that, fortunately. We never did that. But I think what you're going to see more now when we talk about this smart scale or the data that TV has finally, what we're really working on is, number one, creating a lot of branded content. We've done a ton of that with clients from Chrysler to American Express that take over commercial pods with branded content that's connected to the IP in lieu of or what to replace what used to be a commercial pod. Again, consistent, 100% of the time, better metrics. Challenge is ad modeling. How do you make the money work? But I think what you're really going to see now, which I'm very excited about for next year, is it not astounding that the only thing that dictates what lives in a commercial pod on television largely is net of conflict or category conflict and flight dates. And then basically we just throw commercials in there. If it's not conflicted and it's in the right flight date, you're in that pod. With no respect to the consumer experience that said, if you're watching This Is Us, you're this type of person, and you would want to see a series of these ads. So ads that make sense to you, or ads that would resonate with you. So now with our capabilities, we're actually able to program commercial pods. Kind of like if you bought this, you might like this, or if you like this, you like that. So programming of a commercial pod is really astounding that it's never been approached that way. So it brings together context and scale to make for the viewer experience better.
So I have one last question for you, Linda. We could go on, but one
I like
last
it here.
One last question for you. We have, in our outlook, elevated the importance of businesses that have fans. And we've put an exclamation point on the strategic advantages you have when you have loyal, passionate users that show up habitually, that are emotionally, socially connected to your environments. You've got fans all over your portfolio. This Is Us, you mentioned, Sunday Night Football, the Kardashians, all kinds of fan bases. How does it change the game when you talk to advertisers, when you actually don't have just viewers,
Right.
But you have fans?
I think it's really a fascinating, on-point question. I think the digital version or social version of a fan is called an influencer, right? So they have this group around them where they share and they're vocal and they mean something and they can actually influence a trend or influence product movement or sale, or that's the goal. There is no bigger influencer or fan base than the folks who are insatiable about Bravo and E. And even in this environment where people are talking about moderate or temperate investment in television, okay, Bravo and E, we call it illogical exuberance. I mean, it is the exact example of what you're talking about. Fans who can't get enough. This Is Us is a contemporary version of which we knew we had a hit on our hand. We did not know we had an environment changing show or content on our hand. And I would throw in Jimmy Fallon. on that. The fans that want to get attached to or eat, drink, and sleep, go to bed watching him, wake up for the clips, watch it again, reach out to him on Snap, Instagram, YouTube to watch his content. It has created an opportunity where we look to our advertising partners in a much different way. So it's not just about that this is true conversation. I had a meeting recently with the Tonight Show team that changed from, don't just look at my team as the people who sell your 30-second spots. We're the chief marketing officers of your brand. So if Jimmy's hosting the Tonight Show, he's also on the Golden Globes, and he also has an original video that he's pushing out on YouTube. You want to be attached to him in every single way. It has completely changed the way we do business with our big influencers, our big content that is fans. And I think you'll see and hear a lot more about that cohesive, holistic, follow the fan around who wants to be a part of every version of that content.
Terrific. Well, thank you very much, Linda. This was an
Thank
incredible
you.
discussion.
I appreciate you having me. Thank you very much.
I also want to take the opportunity to thank all of the speakers today who participated in our global entertainment and media outlook. Brought fantastic insight, and we really appreciate that you were able to spend this morning with us. You know, today is also the culmination of an incredible amount of effort from a really incredible group of people who support the development of the outlook around the world. And I want to personally thank everyone who's been involved in that as well, because today is a really fantastic day to celebrate the publication of the Outlook, and now it's available to everyone across the network and all of our clients. If you want to get more into the Outlook, there are really two ways to do that. You can go to PwC/Outlook/US and go in deeper into the Outlook content. We just had a taste of the Outlook content today. You can obviously go much deeper with what's available online. Also, please reach out to the PwC partners that you've seen today, and also those that are in your local market. And we look forward to having more discussion with you around the themes, the insights, the perspective that's presented there. So thank you all again for spending the morning with us, and have a great day.
Thank you.